Hello and welcome back. Today we're going to start step 3 in our mixed media project, which is modeling the form. We are going to go in and use our traditional drawing tools and traditional drawing techniques to really build out our drawing. This is the step that is going to take the most time, so sit back, relax, watch a good movie while you're doing it. The other thing to keep in mind is mixed media is all about layering and experimenting, so you can use more than one media in this step if you'd like in different parts of your drawing. Have some fun, experiment, and see what happens, my friends. We are now at the stage where we're going to spend the majority of our time, the third basic step in this process, which is manipulating the surface of our piece to create a sense of volume, form, and texture. So we're going to go in and start laying mark making and really modeling our forms and starting to add the details to our pieces. So this piece, I've got gouache in the background on both of these actually. I've gone in and I've scrubbed up the background here to kind of minimize the contrast that was there before. Both pieces are totally dry and I need to make some decisions about what I'm going to do next. On top of gouache, I can use pretty much any dry medium or more gouache. On top of watercolor, I can use any dry medium plus wet mediums such as ink, pen, and marker and such. And I could use some ink work on top of this as well. It just might dull or ruin the tip of the pen or the marker over time because it is a little chalkier. If I used pastel, I'm going to come in with either pastel pencil, more pastel, potentially some colored pencil, or charcoal. Charcoal works beautifully on top of pastel. And I've got my mixed media cheat sheet that I can use to help me make those decisions as well. Our mixed media cheat sheet, we're on step number 3, modeling the form. We need to think about what we use for color and value blocking as we make our choices when modeling the form. So if you used gouache, which is what I used, you want to stick with dry media. Think pencils, colored pencils, charcoal, graphite, chalk pastel, pastel pencils, oil pastel, or even more gouache. If you used watercolor, you can use all these same medias that you could on top of gouache, so all those dry media, plus you could use wet media such as ink, marker, or pen. You can use ink, marker, and pen on top of watercolor because watercolor is not chalky. If you used chalk pastel as your base layer, you're going to want to use very dry media. So pastel pencils or charcoal work well on top of chalk pastel. You could potentially use colored pencils here as well. They might not be quite as potent as normal. Our last step after this is working with finishing, and we'll talk about that more next time. I'm going to be using colored pencil on this piece and pastel on this piece. What I'm doing here is just using my black colored pencil to start to push in the shapes of the different scales of my fish a little bit more and lay in more detail. I'm going to come in with my orange and some Tuscan red and some yellow and build in more of that as well. I'm also going to come in with my white, and I have an off-white or cream colored pencil to start to lay in more of the values and just build up my marks slowly over time to add the details to this piece. Once I've laid in all of those details on this piece, I'm going to come in with a blending pencil and work on blending some of those colors out because I want the fish itself to feel a little bit shiny, have more of a hard surface to it. So I'm really pushing my highlights and I'm really pushing some shadows here. It's not too dark of a shadow structure on the fish itself. And then coming in and using that blending pencil to make a smooth surface. Once I've done that, I'll come back in with my colored pencils and I'll start to add more details to the piece. So I'll push my shadows a little further if needed, blend things out, start to add some of the scale detail in there, some of the frills on the fins as well. And this is just a lot of back and forth and what you're very used to drawing at this point. So the way that you've always drawn is what I'm doing into my piece here. Once I've finished putting in all the colored pencil on my fish on the right side, I also laid in some colored pencil on the fish on the left, as well as some colored pencil in on top of where the fish is in the reflection. At that point, I shifted to charcoal. You can see me laying in charcoal here with willow charcoal, which is a really soft charcoal product. And then I'm going to go in with a blending stump and I'm going to blend it out, especially around those edges and trying to have it feed into the fins of the piece so those fins look like they're disappearing into the water. Once I've added the charcoal everywhere on my piece that I want that black water, I'm going to go in with a white colored pencil and pastel to do my highlights, and then with the highlights I'll do the same thing I did with the charcoal, use a blending stump to blend it in. One mistake that I made is laying in some color on my orange fish on the left prior to putting pastel over it. Because colored pencil is a really waxy surface, it's going to be difficult to go on top of that waxy surface with a chalky surface like pastel or charcoal. So I'm going to have to do some problem solving in my next step to come back in on top and get some whiter values on top of that left orange fish. On my bird piece, I decided I wanted to come in with some chalk pastel. One of the biggest mistakes my students make when using pastel is they overly blend their pastel because it is so blendable and it's so tempting to go in and do that. I totally get the desire to do that process. When you're using pastel, however, you really want to leave your mark. That's what builds texture and interest in the piece. Do not overblend. So what you'll see me doing on this bird is I'm doing a lot of small hatches that flow in the same direction as the feathers of my bird. And over time, that's going to build up a really nice texture on this piece. I'll also go in and blend a few different spots just because those spots need to be softer. But overall, I want to leave my marks show. It's going to create a much more interesting surface, a much more interesting piece, and really read correctly. So please, if you use pastel, my friends, do not go in and blend the heck out of it. It really is not great practice to do that. Let your marks show, be proud of them, let the hand of the artist show. It makes a much more beautiful piece in the end. One thing that can happen after you've been using your pastels for a little while, they get on your fingers, then you grab a new one and it gets on another pastel. Easy way to clean it, you just take a paper towel and rub each side and the tip before you put them back at the end of your work time. And you'll keep a pastel box that continues to look and function pretty well. So make sure when you're done with your pastels that you take a few minutes to go in and clean them up before popping them back in the box, because you want to make sure that next time you go to grab your pastels, or the next person behind you if you're in a classroom, you've got a nice clean set of pastels to work with. I've left all the marks from my pastel showing because it's going to give a more textural, interesting surface. I want that background to set back a little bit, so I am going to go in and I'm just going to use this paper towel to kind of blend in my pastels in that sky area, just so it sits back a little bit more and doesn't compete with my bird. I just wanted to add a little bit of blue in that space. And I can also take a little bit of the same blue, put it right onto my paper towel, and add it in spaces where I want to add a little bit more. There's some places on my bird that I want to loosen up my marks a little bit and have it again kind of set back. So I will come in and blend just a few little spaces, but what I'm going to be careful not to do is overdo the blending. I don't want to come in and grind into the paper like I just did in the background. You can use a tortillon or a blending stump to get a little bit more precise. I'm just loosening up kind of this undergrowth, it's not undergrowth, the underbits of my bird. And just a few of the spaces that I felt like the marks were a little harsher than I'd like. At this point, I'm done with this step on both of these pieces. I've laid out the basic structures of value and texture and modeled the forms to get the details that I need. And I'm ready for the last step, which is adding final touches. And I'm going to go in with some different materials to do so. Since I used chalk pastel on both of these and some charcoal, I also did a step using a product called Workable Fixative, and you can get that on Amazon or any art website or art store that kind of seals the surface, and it allows you to continue to work on the top of it. Comes in a can like a spray paint. You just got to make sure you don't use too much. On this one, I don't know if it's going to pick up the sheen. There you go. There's a little bit of a sheen, which means I may have layered too much on too fast. So I might have a difficult time using any kind of chalky surface on it. I've also made sure to clean up my pastel box nicely before I put it away. The more you get into art, the more you realize art materials are expensive. You don't want to waste, and you don't want to ruin the things that you've invested in your work. This step should take you a long time. It took me all day to do both these pieces. So set aside some time, listen to a great podcast, watch a movie you love while you're doing it, whatever helps you to pass that time, and just have some fun, layering your media. Feel free to experiment along the way, and don't feel like you have to be stuck with what you start with. If you're like all of a sudden thinking, you know what, I think if I added some charcoal here, it'd work really well. Try it out, see what happens. That's what mixed media is about. Have fun, my friends.